Hi, thank you for talking with us today.
Thank you for coming. We're so excited to have you all here today.
Well, it's a little overcast, but the rain is holding off. So, could you introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of history about yourself first?
Sure. My name is Danielle Wallace, and I'm the programs director here at the Battleship North Carolina, and I would have been here 7 years in October.
Excellent. And we are in Wilmington, North Carolina, and we're at the Battleship North Carolina.
Yes, we are.
Could you talk a little bit about the history of the battleship itself? Not necessarily why it's here yet, but just the battleship.
Well, the battleship served in World War II. She served in the Pacific, and she would have a crew of 2,300 men at one time. She earned 15 battle stars and is the most decorated battleship of World War II.
When did it leave service?
It left service in 1947, and she went to a reserve fleet in New Jersey.
And what happened after that with it?
Well, she essentially just sort of sat there until 1960, where the citizens of the Navy actually was going to say, we're going to scrap the North Carolina. And the citizens of North Carolina said, no, you're not.
And if they scrap it, what would that mean? Would they just actually take it apart?
Take it apart, sell the metal to things, and resalvage the ship.
Okay. And what happened then? The people were upset, so...
Well, when they heard about that, they said, you're not going to do this to our ship. And so a couple of people, like Hugh Morton being one, and James Craig, they got together and they said, we want the North Carolina to come to Wilmington. So they asked all of the school children to give their milk money to help save the North Carolina and bring her home to Wilmington, and that's what they did. And she came to Wilmington in 1961.
Wow, how much did they raise? Do you know?
I think it was a couple of $100,000 to bring the ship.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that some other efforts were made to save some other ships, and they were not as successful, and which is a shame.
That's quite a shame. And why Wilmington? I know it's the Battleship North Carolina, and this is North Carolina, but what is special about the ship in Wilmington?
Well, we have a great river, so it was going to be easy to bring her in.
Okay.
And we also had, Wilmington, and there's a great view of the downtown, and they just thought that this was an appropriate spot. And also, a lot of the key stakeholders involved in getting the ship to North Carolina happened to be around Wilmington.
Okay.
And so they thought that this would also be a really great thing for the community, and it certainly has been.
And what sort of things do you do for the community?
We have field trips, schools come here all the time. I think there's a lot of schools here today. We have Easter egg hunts. We have a Batty Battleship event where children can come and trick or treat on the ship. So it's not just a history museum, but also a place where we tried to have a lot of events for the community, to just be a safe environment, to have that nice battleship stamp of approval.
And do you find that events that aren't necessarily history related brings people in, but also exposes them to the history?
You said it exactly, because the thing about the battleship I have found is that it's a very personal connection that people have to it. They'll go to the ship and they think, this reminds me of my grandfather. My grandfather served on a ship like this, or my father, or my son may be serving in the Navy now. And when people have their events here, like we have weddings and private events on board as well, that gives them the opportunity to make the ship their own, but yet they always like to bring in a part of that history to their event, which is fun to see how people do that and what their connection is.
So this really is a place where the people of Wilmington can come and enjoy it as almost their own.
Well, and not just limited to Wilmington, but to North Carolina. And I like to refer to the ship as the people's ship, sort of like Princess Diana was the people's princess. I like to think of the ship as the people's ship.
And do a lot of decommissioned ships, are they as open to having as many events on it, other than just being museums, as this ship is?
I think a lot of ships have sort of taken our example and are sort of following suit with that, because they've seen the success that we have had with things like the egg hunt and some of the different rental programs and things that we've had. And so we're just excited. I know that there's only 8 museum battleships in the country.
Wow.
There's other ships like carriers and things, but only 8 battleships that serve right now as museum ships.
And is that because those were the only ones that were able to be saved from being it's basically torn apart?
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
And on a normal day when there's not an event going on, about how many people come and look at the ship?
Well, it really just depends on our season. You know, in the fall, we may have about 500, 600 people a day. In the summer, it's easily can get around 2,000 people a day. You know, school group season, I think, you know, we may have about 1,700 school kids on board the ship at one time. So it really just depends. In January, our slowest time of year, you know, we might see less than 100.
Okay. But how does that differ from an event day? But how many people do you get in here on an event day?
On an event day, it's several thousand, and I just know that it's all hands on deck, and we're here to make everybody happy.
So you definitely see a major increase of people being exposed to the history of the ship itself on these days.
Absolutely, yes, and that's one of the reasons why we try to do these type of events.
Is there anything particularly, other than just serving in battle, but is there anything unique or interesting about this ship that sets it aside from other ships?
I don't know if any other ship is as loved as the North Carolina.
Really?
And I know that because people gave their milk money. I'll still have people come up to me and say, that ship is mine, I gave my milk money for it. And I know that this was the only sort of grassroots effort to bring the ship home.
So is it now owned by Wilmington?
It's actually it's owned by the state of North Carolina,
okay,
but we are completely self-supporting.
Okay.
So visitation and these type of events are incredibly important to keeping us literally afloat.
So you don't take any outside funding, it's all just from these events and people who come and visit?
Correct, yes it is.
Is there anything that you would say is unique about your ship now?
Well, another really unique aspect of the ship is that we are definitely haunted. We have had the ghost hunters come here and declare us haunted. A couple of other like fact and fake people have declared us haunted. And I have seen the ghost myself on multiple occasions. And our night watchman has actually lived on the ship for about 38 years.
Okay.
And he's written a book about the ghosts on the battleship.
Wow.
From his experience.
So what does the ghost look like?
Well, I think that there's several.
Okay.
There's at least 2 or 3 guys. And when I saw them, he was like a shadow man. So of course it didn't have any features or anything like that. But they definitely know that you're around.
And does that correlate with anything in the past? Did anybody pass away on the ship?
10 crew members were killed in action during the war, and 13 crew member total. 3 were not killed in action. 5 men were killed when the ship was hit by a torpedo.
Wow.
And the torpedo actually struck this area of the ship over here and blew a hole in the side of it about the size of an 18-wheeler truck.
Wow.
Underneath the water, if you can imagine.
And it survived.
It survived. In fact, an interesting thing about that was on VJ Day.
Okay.
The battleship crew, their original crew, invited the crew of the Japanese submarine who torpedoed them.
Wow.
To meet with them on board the ship.
Wow.
And they presented to that crew part of their torpedo and said, here's your torpedo back.
Wow.
And I just think that was really interesting because the Japanese reported several times that they had sank the North Carolina. But for here, you know, like 60 years later at that point in time, to be standing on the deck with that Japanese crew, I think must have been really quite astonishing.
Wow. And what day was that, you said?
That was VJ Day.
And what is that?
Well, it celebrated the victory in Japan.
Okay.
For the end of World War II.
Okay. And wow, that's just amazing that it didn't sink. It
didn't sink. And another very interesting thing is that we also do a lot of military ceremonies.
Okay.
I think you can see some sailors on board the ship today, and they'll have retirement ceremonies. We just had a mess night for some Marines. There's always something going on. But a neat thing when there's a new North Carolina that's actually a submarine.
Oh, wow.
And it was commissioned in Wilmington.
Wow.
And when she was commissioned, the original crew met with the crew of the submarine to sort of pass the legacy of the North Carolina on, and they had lunch on board the ship. And what was nice for me was that you saw these older men with their great-grandchildren, along with the young sailors and their little babies.
Wow.
To sort of see that generation difference.
Wow.
That was really sort of special.
So it was really it's really a spiritual successor to this ship.
It is, and like I said, it's a very personal connection and meaningful connection that people have to the ship, and that's one of the reasons why they come here.
And if somebody comes here to take the tour, about how long does the tour take?
I would allow at least 2.5 hours to see the tour.
Wow.
And there's 9 decks to see.
Wow, and it's almost complete. I can't imagine that every single nook and cranny is open, but most of the ship is open?
Most of the ship is open. You can go all the way down to the engine room and go all the way up to the bridge.
And can you actually, just out of curiosity, if you go down, all the way down to the engine room, can you see any remaining scars from where it was hit?
That area actually is off the tour route. But
Okay.
if we were to take you down there, you can see some of that welding work where
Really?
the guys worked really quickly to get the ship back into service.
Wow. And if you're coming to see this ship 2.5 hours, that's a hefty chunk of time. If there's 1 or 2 things that you want people to definitely see or you think is super neat for them to see, what would you suggest making sure they see?
I think it's really fun for people to crawl up into the gun turrets.
Okay.
The ship has 3 big guns. Everybody likes the big guns, and you can actually go up inside of those and see how cramped those quarters were for the guys to, operate that machinery. There's another part of the ship called the barbette, which is actually immediately below the gun turret, which
Okay.
would feed up the projectile to the gun to shoot it
Wow.
out. So it's sort of interesting to see how this is really quite a mechanical wonder, how everything is sort of working.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's always been amazing to me. Like, I can understand how it floats and all that, but it's just amazing to look at how heavy and just technologically advanced it is, and it's still, it's a wonderment.
Absolutely, and there were computers on the ship. They weren't the computers we use today, but I mean the Battleship North Carolina was very technically advanced for its age.
Wow.
But another interesting point about it is that when you go through the ship, you can see that all the efforts were spent and given to the weaponry.
Okay.
Not a lot of comfort is given to the men. They're sort of an afterthought. But I mean, everything is about the weapons and making the ship work. Because if the ship doesn't work well,
Doesn't matter how comfortable the beds are.
that's
if it's
right.
going to get sunk, then
that's
there's
right.
no point.
That's right. And when the ship was hit by the torpedo, I think it is quite a testament to the crew of their training that she was listing quite heavily because she was taking on so much water, but they righted her by counter flooding and rejoined the fleet within 30 minutes of having been struck.
Wow.
So I think that's
Wow. That is quite
to their skill.
Amazing, actually. And now this is actually going back a little bit, but I noticed on the side of the ship there, it's got flags and it's got
some ribbons.
ribbon. Yeah.
She's a decorated ship.
And those are the stars.
Those are some of the stars and just some of you can see where she's hit some planes and some land
Okay.
bombardments and some ships and different things like that.
Okay, so that's what that represents.
It does. And then of course, like I said, she's decorated just like a sailor or an officer would be.
And then is that common of ships? If they see battle, they get decorated like a
If
soldier?
they serve with pride, like the North Carolina did, which most ships do.
Which is kind of interesting about the people on board, because if the ship is being given this honor, all the people who served during that time are de facto getting this honor as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why the original crew members still come here every year for their reunion.
And every year they come back.
They meet, and now they're in their late 80s, but they are definitely connected to this ship.
Wow, that must be an amazing day each year to get to see that.
It is. It really is.
So what is the timeline of the ship from when it was created to when it was decommissioned?
The ship was actually commissioned in 1941. She was it wasn't that long actually after Pearl Harbor had happened. She was originally going to serve in the Atlantic, but because the Navy had lost all these ships, they moved her to the Pacific. So she served until 45, of course, with the war.
Right.
And then, but she was struck with the torpedo in 1942. Then she was decommissioned in 1947.
Wow.
From 45 to 47, she served as a training vessel. So from 47 to 61, she was in that reserve fleet until she came home here.
And what year was she actually built before she was commissioned?
I think construction started in like 1933.
Okay.
So it took quite a while, and to get. And I think plans changed as new technology advanced at the time.
Okay. And how many people served on the ship during its lifetime?
There would be 2,300 at one time, but over 10,000 through the lifespan of the ship.
Okay. Do you have any other?
I got one.
What?
What's the cyclic rate of the minigun back there?
Well, I know that there's 20 millimeter guns, there's 40 millimeter, a 5-inch gun, and then the 16-inch gun.
Okay.
So I don't know if that completely answers that question.
Do you know the?
I know that the ship has 20 millimeter guns, 40 millimeter guns, a 5-inch gun, and then the big 16-inch guns.
Wow. And what was the rate of fire on them? How often could it shoot?
Oh, they would shoot fairly often. I'm not sure exactly how quickly they could do it. I know that the 16-inch guns, the big ones, would shoot very fast. But I have heard that if you start hearing the 20 millimeters go off, that's not a good thing, because that means that the planes are very close.
Oh, wow. So this was a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, absolutely. That's why she would sail next to the powerful carriers to protect her, because they had planes and she had guns.
Thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you for having me and for choosing us.
And I suggest everybody come down and take a look at this if you're in the area, because it's one thing to see it on your screen, but it's an entirely different experience to see it in person.